Welcome back, Mistakes listeners. This is Dave, and this is episode 60. We recorded this episode on March 14th, 2016, and this week we asked the question, what, or should I say, when is your child ready to have their own cell phone? That's right. We tried to tackle the cell phone topic. When should our kids get one? It's a good question. I guess you'll have to listen in to find out. As you know, you can follow us on Twitter at Parent Mistakes. You could also like us at Parenting Mistakes. And as always, sit back and enjoy the show.
So you remember high school, Dave, don't you?
Yeah, you like to talk about high school a lot. Why is that?
I'm not the only one who likes to talk about high school.
Sure. I do remember high school.
So I got a question for you about high school.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, before I ask my question, this is a good opportunity for me to preface what we're talking about and reintroduce the audience to us.
Okay.
And it will explain a little bit why I'm asking this question. So that's Dave. I'm Todd. We've known each other since junior high. Went to high school together, hung out a lot, went to separate colleges, and Dave resettled in our hometown of Greater Seattle, and I moved to Los Angeles, where I've lived ever since. Dave has 2 kids. I have 3. Dave likes to refer to me as the elder parent, even though we are the same age, only because I have older children, and he has younger children. So, do you remember when we were in high school how we communicated with each other? Obviously, and I'll before you answer that, obviously this is pre-internet, pre-cell phones, pre-pagers. So obviously we use the phone. But do you recall us communicating with each other in order to make arrangements for, say, social outings?
Like how we did it?
Yes.
Well, yes, I do. And the reason I do, this is going to sound really weird, and it's always weird coming from me, is it not? I watched a Rick Astley video about a month ago or so.
Why?
It's because I was reminiscing. You're a reminiscer too.
Yes,
right?
I am.
And
Yes,
my kids love Rick Astley. He's tame. He's fun to watch. He dances around. You know, it's good times.
Okay.
Regardless of that, in one of the videos, he bumps into a girl, and the girl actually gives him a time in which he can call her, which my kids don't get. And I thought, how weird is it going to be for them to kind of watch this video, like even as they get older, and to realize that she actually had to give him a time to line up a call, right? And then the next scene that you see is Rick goes home, looks at the note and says, oh, 6 p.m. I can call at 6 p.m., right? And so then the video kind of pans back and forth, and the next thing you know, she's there near the phone at about 6 p.m., and she picks up. So as I recall, and I go, and this is archaic, right? But you used to have to arrange a lot of things. And I do remember my parents, or even me, saying, I will be home between the times of about 5 and 8 p.m. You
Correct.
can call about those times. Or we're done at dinner at 6, you can call from about 6 to 9. And let me tell you, if you were calling past 9 with somebody, it was rude. Or it started getting weird.
Yes.
Right? You got to call at 10 p.m. People are like, hey, what's up? There was definitely a lot of phone protocol involved in the 80s, 70s,
Correct.
60s, 50s,
Correct.
so on and so forth. All of that is gone.
Correct.
And this Rick Astley video is almost, well, they're all archaic, but it's even more dated because of the interaction that Rick is having with this girl in the video.
And that's funny because I know we talked on the phone, obviously, but I have very little recollection of us talking on the phone aside from maybe like a weeknight when we're talking about homework or talking about some other stuff, like I don't remember us calling each other to make arrangements. I don't remember how I communicated with my parents to let them know what I was doing, say after school on a Friday. I know we had a payphone. I remember the payphone in the courtyard area. I know I used that a few times. I'm sure I went to the office a few times to use the phone.
Which, if it was a social call, they'd tell you to use the payphone, right?
Right.
Like you didn't go to the office for unofficial business. You would actually use the payphone if you're going to make a social call.
Yes. I do recall a couple of times going to the office and telling them I needed to call my mom for something, and then going in the back, and I was either with you or with Chris, and we called the ski patrol to check the roads to see if we could go night skiing. Sorry, BCS.
That was not me. That was Chris.
That was probably Chris. Okay, so you know why I'm asking these questions. See, I can't sneak the segue up on you this time, can I?
It's okay. I mean, it's fun to reminisce about how we used to do it.
Yes.
We could still talk more about how we used to do it, but what I wanted to say is that, and it was really easy to get stood up. Right? Like,
oh, sure.
You'd tell people, I'm going to be there at a certain time, and then you'd wait there at that certain time, and you could end up looking like a real buffoon. Right?
Right.
And you could literally get stood up. I am pretty sure you could get stood up in this day and age, but it's a lot harder to do.
Yes.
Because you can immediately text. Because if that in this day and age, if a millennial is not connected somehow to the internet 24/7, then it's really weird to get stood up by somebody that is that, plugged in, per se.
Correct. Yes. You and I and our friends, we'd be at Bell Square, and we'd be like, okay, we want to split up for a little bit, and we're going to meet back at the Orange Julius at 3 o'clock.
And here's the thing. If you didn't show up, you clearly were lost in the ether. There was nothing I could do about it.
Right. You just waited.
Or you didn't, right?
Or you didn't.
Yeah, like the guy could have, you just don't know.
They know.
There was a lot of mystery in the
rest
80s.
of the people know our plans for later, and they can meet up with us.
That's right. I think Chris actually had a great protocol, which I thought was crazy, but he stuck to it every time, was he always gave everybody an hour.
Wow, did he really?
He really did. You could call him up right now. Call him up. Hopefully he's there. But yeah, he that was his personal policy. He'd give anybody an hour.
Okay.
Yeah. I give him about... I kind of changed my policy after listening to that. It was really nice of him to do. I couldn't do an hour, but I would certainly wait around for 15, 20 minutes, depending on the person.
Sure.
Right?
So we bring this up, reminiscing about yesteryear, because our topic tonight as parents is, when is a good time to give your kids a cell phone? Or I guess in this day and age, a smartphone, just a phone in general.
Sure.
A mobile, as people in other countries would call it. And I guess I could preface this by sort of acknowledging, I guess, my observations of why people do this. One is just because it's there, because it allows you to communicate with your child. Two, it's sort of an extra, I guess you'd say, an extra safety net. It's another tether.
Well, let's help our audience out a little bit. Once again, you have older children.
I do.
I have younger children, and one of the intriguing aspects of the show is me looking at you down the road and seeing how you kind of entered into this scenario. Because quite frankly, a kindergartner with a cell phone is still pretty big stretch. I haven't seen any kindergartners with cell phones, even in Seattle, right?
Perhaps not, but I would not be surprised if they existed.
Yeah, I'm not saying they don't. I just haven't seen it.
I know there are kids at my daughter's school that have phones in elementary school, reasonably young age. So we've mentioned before, I have 3 kids. Dave has 2. My oldest is 18. My second is about to turn 15. And then my youngest is 11. Both my 18-year-old and my 15-year-old have phones. And again, our purpose for this show is not necessarily to tell people how to parent. Ours is simply to say how we parent and discuss why. Our rule so far has been that you get a phone at the end of 8th grade. So sort of going into that summer, preparing for high school. And for us, I think it's been driven to a certain extent by the functionality of what our kids are into, namely sports and, say, other stuff with church where they are, riding bikes and that sort of thing. We can get away without cell phones to that point, and probably even beyond. But once they start being in situations where we're not quite sure when they're going to be back from places, when they're going to get to places, that sort of thing, we sort of like to have that extra layer of communication, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So I guess when you hear those ages, I mean, to a certain extent, what does that make you think about? Does that seem like the right age to do it? Because I can tell you, even my kids asked for cell phones earlier than that, because a lot of their peers had cell phones earlier. In fact, our daughter and our son each told us at some point that they were like the last members of their class to get cell phones, which we know is not true, but there it is.
Well, okay, so it's a tricky issue because it's not just giving your child a cell phone, you're giving them all sorts of new access. So, I mean, there's a lot of questions that I would have, obviously, that I will have for you as we go forward. But, just from my perspective as it stands right now, for us, just one cell phone is a $500 to $600 purchase, right?
Yes.
If I get you the latest iPhone and give you kind of that responsibility. So right now, my wife and I are sitting at about $1,000 worth of product here.
Correct.
So now I'm going to be entering, I'm guessing, into some sort of family package. I certainly don't want to be entering into some sort of, I'm paying for this monthly. So it's just going to be a straight, I'm going to pay for the service, but it's going to be kind of a straight up buy when that occurs. So there's kind of there's a monetary hurdle.
Yes.
That's got to occur at some point. So for you, it's like 8th grade is at the point in which I feel like someone's not going to be losing their cell phone, which I'm sure there's another question that I would have for you as time goes on is an 8th grader an appropriate age to actually receive a cell phone and be responsible with it, and what if they lose it? There are other things too in this day and age that are interesting. It's a very interesting world that we live in that it'd be great to have tabs on my children at all time. At some point here, I'd say within the next couple of years, Kaylin's going to start taking the bus into school. If she's got a cell phone, there's going to be some sort of ability that if she has a cell phone, let's say by 1st or 2nd grade she has a cell phone. Not saying that's what's going to occur, but as a parent, I think I can track that. I can track where she is at any given time. Most likely because that child's not going to give up her phone. If she does give up her phone, then it's a different issue. And I'm sure if she's taken, they're just going to take the phone away from her. But at the same time, there's sort of an assurance of I kind of have tabs on my kid at any given moment.
Okay. Yes, except for, and you understand the basics of technology in terms of cell phones. One other thing that I didn't mention was when our kids get a cell phone, at least the first 2 kids have gotten a cell phone at the end of 8th grade. They've gotten a basic phone.
Yeah, they got dumb phones.
Yes. Now, that accomplishes a couple of things, and then it also provides a couple of additional hurdles. It's cheaper because it just is. It's a cheaper phone than if you buy an iPhone or a Galaxy or something like that. And it also allows me to sort of restrict, say, data usage, being on the internet. You can certainly go on the internet with those phones, but it's not as easy, and I can basically just turn that off. But what that doesn't allow me to do is do what you're talking about, is track my kids.
Yep. Well, not only that, but you can communicate with them at any time as
Yes.
well. I mean,
Yes.
that's the other thing is that not with a smartphone. Yes, I can track my child without them knowing it, quote unquote. I can map my child, but with a dumb phone, I actually can call them at any given moment too, right?
Sure.
I'll bet you too. There's an app out there that tracks dumb phones as well.
Yeah, there might be.
There's a number out there that's detected via GPS, and hey, there they are. They're in Georgetown, and I'm in South Park. So,
Yeah.
Again, I don't know. I'm assuming as technology continues to get more improved, and that's the other thing too, is that I'm looking at probably another 6 years before I'm issuing cell phones to people, and who knows what we'll have at that point. Technology moves so quickly. Like the real crux of the issue is, and I think the reason that we're presenting the show is when should they have them? When is the age of responsibility? And or, I mean, it's sort of like, I mean, it's, what's nice is that the government actually says there's a point when your child can drive. So that's not determined by you, although it kind of is.
Right.
But at least you can kind of gauge it like, hey, at 16, the government says you can go. There is no, say, government policies around when they should have a cell phone, right?
Right. Now, let me ask you this. Would you see yourself as being at all susceptible to, say, the peer pressure of other parents and other families getting cell phones at a certain age?
Well, sure. And here's another point that's coming up as technology begins to get even more and more incorporated into our lives. There are a lot of schools out there that are actually saying, "Hey, here's your iPad," and
Right.
a lot of the iPads now are also telecommunication pieces. They're able to chat, talk, do all those things on your iPad, FaceTime, and that's probably going to come a lot sooner than, say, just a plain old cell phone. So if I felt like the school and our school is not going in that direction right now, they can't afford something like that. But if they were, I would feel the pressure to possibly get on board with that show. And at that point, if they get an iPad, again, I guess I'd have to see what the school's doing, but I'm assuming kids would start texting their teachers,
Yep.
start texting other students,
Yep.
and they can start texting me. That is if, of course, the school firewall allows it. Right? There are
Right.
all sorts of things that go into this, but I guess I have to reel it in a little bit and say, for me personally, when should my child have a cell phone? And are you asking, when is the pressure that I'm going to feel to have that cell phone, right? Are there outside forces that are going to pressure me to get my kid that cell phone? That's so hard to predict, right?
It is, but again, think about ages and do you think it's appropriate? And again, we're not here to critique other parents necessarily, but do you find it appropriate for, say, a parent to get their child a cell phone when they're, say, in elementary school? What would be the reason for that?
Again, I think what I told you earlier is the ability to communicate with your child whenever and to quote-unquote track them.
Okay. But think back again, and this is where we sort of come back full circle to what our experience was growing up. And we're not going to sit here and go, "Oh, the kids today, they should just do it the way we did it because it worked for us." We don't necessarily do that. But you have to think about, say, a child in an elementary school environment. Are they 100% safe from any outside dangers? No. But are they in a relatively controlled environment where they have adult figures that are guiding sort of their daily experience? In other words,
yes.
What is it that would require a parent to text their child directly during the day versus what is still done in schools and what was done for schools when we were younger was, you call the school and say, "Hey, could you send a note to the office or send a note to my kid's classroom to say, I'll pick you up at 2:30 for your dentist appointment," or something.
Okay. Let's derail this conversation. All right?
Okay.
Let's take it a different angle here.
Derail.
What is wrong with a third grader having the ability to communicate with their friends?
With their friends?
Yeah. Let's say we give a third grader let's say we give a responsible third grader a cell phone because, hey, I can actually communicate whatever I want with my third grader on the fly. Like, where are you going now? Are you going to this friend's house? Whatever. Because in third grade, I was able to go down the block and hang out with people away from my house, right? I was actually in third grade, I was able to basically hold on to things. I wasn't losing things. What would be wrong with, or what would be right? I mean, we could look at it that way too. Like, wouldn't it be fair to give them the best advantage that you could, which is this piece of technology that gives them access to all sorts of good things at any given moment, and they can communicate with whoever they want. And this is the future they're going to be living in. It's not like this is going to be a future that's denied. All these things seem good to me, even in third grade.
So I guess I would push back on that a little bit to sort of say, okay, you were allowed to go down the block when you were in third grade.
Yep.
My kids were not allowed to go down the block when they were in third grade. I would say all the way through middle school, I still had a pretty strong control over where my kids were, what they were doing, that sort of thing. Sure, they'd go to friends' houses, they'd be at church, they'd be at school, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't, they sort of weren't out of my pattern yet. The only exception, and that's part of the reason, we sort of transitioned from middle school to high school, was they'd start to get into sports where the team would get on the bus and go to another school and play a game, and we don't know exactly when they're going to be back.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues that my parents had with the phone in particular was it usually had a cost associated with it, especially if it was a long-distance call.
Right.
All of that is not quite the way it used to be. There's a monthly kind of fee, and there's some data charges, like, I had to watch the data, like if he's got access to YouTube or whatever, or she's got access to YouTube on their phone, and whatever happened is there, and they're not on the Wi-Fi, but pretty much Wi-Fi is everywhere. Again, it comes down to this. Why wouldn't you want to give your child all of this access and the ability to communicate with you at any given moment?
Well, and I think...
why not?
Well, as you mentioned, there is a cost. There's a monthly financial cost for subscribing to a cell phone. As you said, a smartphone can cost $500 or $600 retail.
That's flat. And I'm sure you can get a family package, and of course, this is where my ignorance steps up. I don't know what a smartphone family package might look like. Yeah,
well, again, we don't want to sort of dilute this conversation into our evaluation of all the cell phone carriers.
Right. So I'm going back to, why wouldn't you want this for your kid? Why wouldn't you want a third grader who has enough responsibility to have this kind of access? Why would you want to deny them that?
Well, a couple of reasons, I think, or at least a couple of cautions. One, in a lot of school settings, they're not supposed to be just having their phones out. And so if you want to get a hold of your child, and if the child is following the rules of the school, they're not really supposed to be having their phone out anyway. Now, are there going to be kids that sort of violate those rules? Are there parents that are going to violate those rules? Sure. I think the second thing you got to think about is that phone is not really about communication a lot of the times. Because when you look at what kids use, say, smartphones for, yes, it's to communicate with each other sometimes, but it's also to access all sorts of other stuff. Games, social media sites, that sort of thing. And one of the things that we discussed, and we can discuss this will be a subject for another podcast, is that when it comes to social media accounts, even if certain sites said you were supposed to be a certain age before you had an account, we have found that some of our peers have signed their kids up for it, basically allowed them to forge the birth date and that sort of thing in order to get a certain account. So now you've got kids that have these social media accounts pretty early. And you have to sort of ask yourself the question of, do I really want to open up this access to the internet, to all the stuff that's out there?
That's hard. That's a hard thing to say. Like, when you say all that stuff that's out there, I don't, it's I'm assuming that you could probably put some blocks on that stuff, or what you guys have done is you've given your children dumb phones, right? They're just phones.
Right.
There's nothing,
Right.
they can do other than maybe doing some text here, and I'm probably calling.
Right. And I think from our standpoint, you sort of look at it as, okay, I can go through all of this sort of rigmarole to try to guard against some of this. But when you flip it back around, you say, are there really any benefits that really outweigh? Do my kids really need to be texting each other when they're in third grade? Do I really need to get a hold of them outside of, say, the structure of the school? And at least for us raising our kids, the answer was no.
Right.
And you also got to go back to, and again, we don't want to just wax poetic about the past. But you also sort of say, look, we were raised in a time where your parent gave you instructions before you left for school, and that was it, right?
Yeah.
There weren't really updates during the day.
All right. So enough with devil's advocate. The government actually has said something about cell phones. They have nailed a law about distracted driving, right?
Right.
So basically, you're out there driving, and I think I saw this on Mythbusters, where they were basically comparing somebody that was drinking and driving and somebody that was texting while driving, and basically the texter was way in a worse position because they're literally looking down at their lap.
Right.
I think for me, you could actually call this distracted living, right?
Sure.
So if you look anywhere at a restaurant or you're waiting at the movie theater or whatever, you are looking at people that are living in a distracted world.
Right.
Right? Wherever you go, there is somebody kind of staring at a phone. I wish I could say I was innocent of this, but sometimes I don't know what to do with myself, so I'm going to look at my phone and see what emails have come through, right? For a child, this is not, in my opinion, a good experience to have. There needs to be some sort of balance, and I don't really necessarily need to have a third grader start embracing distracted living.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it gets to the point where you got, like, I can literally tell people, like, I'll be walking up to somebody at school and I'll say, can you believe the sunrise that we had this morning? Can you believe what has occurred? Look at that blue. Look up and look at that blue in the sky. It blows their mind every time.
Sure.
Because as a society, we've become, oh boy, I'm on my soapbox. But,
yeah, you are.
But
That's
what
right.
I'm saying is that I don't think our children need to enter into distracted living anytime sooner than they have to. Even though I think there are some aspects of distracted living that are good, right? I have all sorts of access. We like to call it accessing the oracle. I've got a question I want it answered. You can do that now. Now, whether or not you're going to get the truth, that's a whole other topic, right? We should do another one on Does the Internet Tell the Truth?
Yes. Well, and I can tell you, having watched my kids grow up and watching groups of kids at schools and a youth group and that sort of thing, the phone is something that they gather around.
Yep.
So the moment a kid has a phone at whatever age, the kids are just drawn to it, and all of a sudden they're around it. Now, can it build a little bit of community that way? Can they share something? Hey, you see this picture? You see this, whatever, and everybody laughs and that sort of thing. Sure, that can be a positive thing. But I think it goes back to, for parents, you have to sort of say, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you paranoid about the school? Are you paranoid about your kid? Do you just or do you just give in to what your kid asks? Because I'm sure there are kids that say, "Hey, I want an iPhone," and the parent gets it for them.
Sure.
And that's a whole other question about whether you give your kids exactly what they want.
So you've kind of put a hard date on it and said, at this point, my children got their cell phones. I will say this, it's going to be a matter for us as to when the appropriate time is for that child in which they can basically have an understanding of this is a tool and it's not a way of life.
Correct.
It's a tool that makes life a lot easier, but it's certainly not something that I constantly want to be plugged into, and I need to be, I have to feed off of it. There are so many other great things out there that will always be better. Check it out. I mean, I am Mr. Video Game. I am Mr. Media Hound. All these things. If you ask me what's probably the greatest media source that I can access, it's a book. And why is that? Because my brain can do things that are way more incredible than anything can fabricate on a screen, on a phone, you name it. A video game, basically my mind can outgun it any time.
Right, and when you said, you communicate to your kid that it's a tool, I think that's a good thing, but you also got to keep in mind that by giving them access to this, you can say it 100 times over that it's a tool, but you've provided to them a media entertainment device anyway.
It's true. And part of it, they need to figure that out on their own, right?
Right.
And I want them to be, I guess in my brain, I want them to be in a position where they can actually be mature enough to figure it out on their own.
Sure. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily that simple. You have to respect the power of it in a lot of ways.
That's crazy to think about. It's crazy.
Yeah, you have to respect that it is a distraction. And, we told our kids right away. We told them that we reserve the right to take their phone at any point, check their texting history, check their browsing history. And again, we know that kids can do all sorts of things to erase this and misdirect that if they really want to.
It's true.
There's a lot of tools out there to do that. So we're not naive to that fact. But we did let them know early on. And there have been times where, we've taken phones away for a period of time. And that's one thing that, once they have it, they really want to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
And we've even had a couple of times, this will, related to this, but, as our kids got into high school, sometimes when we've had kids over to our house, we've, every once in a while, collected phones at the door. And just put them in the basket. And just
Sounds
say,
like Chick-fil-A. You know that Chick-fil-A has a meal plan like this, right?
They do?
They do. You could do a special family dinner, and they give you a basket in which the requirement is you put your cell phone in the basket so that you can have a family a dinner. Right?
Is that true?
Without cell phone distraction. This is 100% true.
I've not heard of that.
Yeah.
All right. So there you go.
Yeah, I'll put one more caveat on this, just kind of a fun note. There are a lot of futurists out there that predicted our future and basically said that we would get to the point where technology would be so all-consuming that we would actually start to build vacation spots that had no technology whatsoever.
Yes.
We've not reached that point yet, but I'm looking forward to that haven, wherever that might be.
I think if you look, you will find that at least in some descriptions, it'll at least highlight that. If you're looking for that, if you want to find a cabin in the woods that has that, I'll bet some places have advertised that because they know that that's important to people.
No, these are all future high-tech vacations, like the size of Hawaii type locations in which you could go and have no technology whatsoever. And right now, as a society, we are reaching that point where it's just everywhere. Yep. It's crazy. So, like I said, it's a balance. But it's a tougher issue. Just kind of rolling it or reeling it back in a little bit. It's not as simple as when should my child get a cell phone. It's at what point should my child start accessing this incredible technology that we have available to us.
Sure.
And what are the consequences of that, right?
Right. And that's the thing. You have to go back to your reasoning. And we've talked about this before with other podcasts, is that, parenting is, unfortunately, at some point about disappointing your children because you can't make them happy all the time. And the argument of, all my friends have phones. You can't buy into that. That's weak parenting. So.
From your perspective.
That's right. Anything else?
That's all I got.
All right. Well, you can follow us on all of our social media outlets because we love us some social media because we're grown-ups. You can like us on Facebook, Parenting Mistakes. You can follow us on Twitter, Parent Mistakes. You can support us financially on Patreon.
Well, since we've changed our format, I just want to say, yes, Patreon. But since we changed our format, enter into the conversation with us.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Because now it's not just about reviewing TV and telling us what you want us to watch. It's now much more of a conversation that we like to have with you.
Correct.
Give
and you
us
can
feedback
send us
and
email
right.
to parentingmistakes, all one word, at hotmail.com. And if you think we are completely wrong and coming out of left field, hey, we can live with that.
Oh, and I'd love to hear how other people have resolved this. Even
Yes.
like our previous week's episodes, we have an episode coming up that is going to be, I think, in my opinion, pretty controversial. So,
Ooh, that's called a tease right
yeah,
there.
hopefully it comes out tomorrow, right? So there you go.
Yes, exactly. Until then.